Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you all with us for our Lunch and Learn that is social workers working with Muslim people and communities. We are so grateful to have Ax Montasser, who is a practicum student with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers and is going to be sharing some learning with us. I want to begin first with a land acknowledgement, and I want to invite everyone to join with me in the land acknowledgement by putting in the chat where you are located. If you are not familiar with placenames.mapdev.ca, that is the website we like to encourage people to use because it is interactive and it has a feature that helps you pronounce. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Unama'ki, which is located in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating this acknowledgement into action by seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education. We commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty partners. We commit to learning and to unlearning. Let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. When we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. It is in light of this that we, the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, are committed to creating professional development opportunities that can help us begin to acknowledge our intersectionality, our interconnectedness, and to work towards the justice, equity, and reconciliation that is part of our Code of Ethics mandate. With that, I am so excited to introduce Ax. Many of you already got to learn from Ax because he was part of our closing panel for our annual conference in 2023 and was highly recommended. Everyone said they wanted to hear more of what Ax had to say. So Ax, we are so grateful to you for being here. And I am especially grateful because I have gotten to learn from Ax because Ax is completing his social work practicum with the Nova Scotia College of Social Work, working with me, and is going to be doing another awesome lunch and learn on a tool around vicarious trauma and burnout that he has been developing for us. And if you haven't signed up for that, it is going to be, I think, next week. So stay tuned for that and for all of our other awesome professional development opportunities. And Ax, I'm excited to get to learn from you. Go for it.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ax Montasser. We're going to be starting here now. There we go. Islamophobia, the Muslim experience and social work, lunch and learn. With me, Ax Montasser. To start off with the land acknowledgement, I'm out west. So I wanted to give a land acknowledgement for where I am, coming from Treaty 7 land, the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is made up of the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, Nakota Nations, and the Métis Nation of Region 3. So a little bit about me, some of you already know, but just a refresher. I used to be a community peace officer with Alberta Health Services. I am part of the faith leadership, spiritual leadership for Al-Ta'id. Al-Ta'id means the oneness. We're a small mosque for progressive, queer affirming, and so pretty busy finishing my degree, social work degree. I got involved initially in a lot of some anti-racist activism around the time of 2017, after the M103 came in, the bill M103, following a really awful mosque shooting. And we had to organize against far-right groups. And what we ended up doing was we had a push for to create a provincial anti-racist council. And in that work, we started there was a lot of expanding into creating networks across the country. And so what started off as something really awful has blossomed into something very strong and full of solidarity. Just a bit more about the mosque that I'm part of. Like I said, we operate under Radical Ta'id, the oneness, unity, and we use anti-oppressive practice. We're very open to, we pray together, we build community together, we do lots of activities, give opportunity for reflection and discussion, and we're very affirming and inclusive. And we're not just looking to build a religious space, we're looking to build a healing space. My role is I do a lot of outreach and peer support. I take part in interfaith dialogues and advocacy, community organizing, and I'm doing a lot of interpretation as well. So to preface this, now that you know a little bit about me, this is sort of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about Islamophobia. That'll be kind of the main focus, and then we're going to a little bit of a intro to Islam and sort of things to keep in mind when you're working with people who are consider themselves Muslim. So Islamophobia, I know that if you've done some reading, there is some people who say it came out in 1990. It actually came out in 1920, from a French painter who converted to Islam, and he was very, very critical of where he came from, because he's from France, and he was critical of the government and how they had this attitude towards Muslims. And France at the time had colonized quite a few Arab countries, Muslim countries, and so he was there and he was doing painting, and he was very upset about the treatment, and so he is the one who coined this term initially, but we don't hear too much about it until more recently. Edward Said started using the term in 1985 when he wrote Orientalism Reconsidered. Orientalism, as we're aware, academic Western approach to Eastern people. It's just the way that the people in the West look at people in the East and come up with their own ideas without really asking what what the people value, they just kind of make assumptions. You know, so we have both of these we have Danette and we have Said at different times, but saying the same thing. European observations of Muslims and Islam have been negative and biased, and that has affected Muslims even today. And it's not just the French; it's a lot. We only have so much time. The definition of Islamophobia is a term to explain the unfounded fear, contempt, and dislike of Islam and subsequently Muslims. Islamophobia is dehumanizing. It justifies discrimination and violence against Muslims. And there are different kinds of it at different levels within our society. It is the deadliest at the highest level of control and power with governments and institutions, and it is used for profit to justify expansion in other countries, normally from countries like the United States, kind of going into certain countries. The photo that I have here on the right is actually a photo that it's a photo that has the writing of saying that this is out of Fort McMurray, which is a town, like a city, like on the northern end of Alberta. And these are all this isn't true at all, but there was a big mosque that's being built there, and so there was a lot of paranoia that was being spread around this mosque being built. And so a lot of people who are Islamophobic started saying that this is the start of Sharia law. Sharia law is, to explain, Sharia law is it's the Western interpretation of just of what we call the Sharia. The Sharia is like our guiding principles. It tells us where we're going, and it gives us sort of rules and regulations to how we live our lives. And so it's been turned into that we're trying to create legislation and that we're trying to change the laws of the country. The way that things are going now is that Islamophobia kind of takes on a little bit of it takes on aspects of anti-Semitism. It is really popular among conservatives, and it if it comes from big media outlets, Rebel Media, for example, and it trickles down, then it is very easy to consume and it's very easy to spread that way. A lot of ideas around Islamophobia is that Islam is monolithic and static, that it is inferior to the West, it is barbaric, irrational, primitive, and sexist, violent and aggressive. I mean, if you've watched movies, especially movies from the 90s, if there's an airplane involved and it's an action movie, we kind of know who's on the airplane. We kind of know who's taking it over, right? These are things that we've heard plenty of times, and there's lots of deception and trickery and being sneaky, which plays into a lot of older concepts of what people thought of Arabs, sneaky Arab. Believed to be very political and expansive and taking over. It's like a very imperial kind of idea. And where Muslims are allowed to use what's called taqiyya to lie. So this is one of the things that I came up where I went in with good intentions, thinking I could just have a conversation, but when you're talking to people who think that you're trying to take over their country, they're going to just say that you're lying. So there wasn't really a point in the conversation. That's why it's so important to talk about this from the top down instead of from the bottom up. Speaking of, this is a little graph that I made based on Barbara Perry's work that she has done. Barbara Perry is a researcher who looks at far-right movements and far-right violence, and I was kind of inspired to take the work that she has done and turn it into a bit of a graph. So as we can see here, the media influences state, the state influences media, and then these things trickle down into the populace, and then the populace, depend the ones that are sort of motivated to act in a harmful way, then spread violence, harm, however you want to look at it, to different people within the society. Depend on race, religion, politics, and gender. Right. So it's one of those things where media and state will influence each other for whatever reason, whatever that looks like. This I could expand this more to say who's funding the media, who's funding the state, but I try to keep it as simple as I could. So we'll just kind of look at sort of things about, we'll look at harm and what that looks like, different issues that come up. We're going to use the social work aspect here, micro, meso, and macro. So as a quick overview here: micro, interpersonal interactions; meso is police interactions, think tanks, religious group demonstrations, disruptions, and communities countering these groups. Macro is, as we said, bigger stuff: legislation, media, and how all of these systems affect each other. So on the micro, it's people interacting with each other in the community, whether they're students taking public transit, people who are out in public. Muslim women who wear the hijab are the ones who are the most targeted by this. Muslim women who are also women of color, like Black women especially. There's an incident that happened in Edmonton that was almost like it was out of like a really bad old police show. Very exaggerated, but it was very real. So, and then there's people who are Muslim-ish, so people who could be considered to be Muslim if they didn't know better. People who are considered this are Sikhs, people of color, people speaking a language other than English, or dressing with other cultural influences. The photo on the right is a photo of a man who went after a couple who were in the parking lot. The man was a man of color, and he was speaking French. And the man here with the bat heard him and approached him and believed that he was a Muslim and was making threats, and he hit him with the bat. It was a story that was out in Ontario that happened in 2017. And so it was just kind of a prime example of someone who isn't even Muslim, who just isn't white, isn't speaking English, is being targeted. Here we have a photo of, what are they called now? The National Advancement, the National Advancement Party. They run on the federal level, but it's just this one guy here, Steve Garvey. He's a local politician, if you will. And so this is sort of bigger groups that start to form in communities and then start acting out. In this photo that we see here, they're at Red Deer and they're protesting Syrian refugees that are at a school and suggesting that these kids are terrorizing all the other white kids. And that's just to start. We can see here, if you look over to the left, there's a man in red holding a WCAI, WCAI, we started calling them, World Coalition Against Islam. And they're anti-Muslim, and they had many people in the leadership of this group who just turned out to be white supremacists, neo-Nazis, which is something that we see pretty often. Some other groups to mention are like the 3%ers, which were like a paramilitary group, and they provided a lot of protection. They showed up with weapons, but they were pretty disciplined. But they also talked about how they were monitoring mosques and monitoring Muslims, and it's so this is sort of a concern for just kind of, when people start organizing, that's when we need to start kind of thinking about how we're going to act that. And the best way to do that is to counter it with other groups, whatever that looks like. Now, on the bigger scale, the macro scale, that is where the most damage is done. And that is where we need to, that is where a lot of action needs to be taken. There's just even the general legacy media disproportionately reports on Muslims, and because of that, there is furthering Islamophobic beliefs. And non-Muslims are deemed to are vulnerable, and they have more nuance in their stories. When we see the same thing with Black people who are targets of crime and whatnot, or targets of police violence. And there's, we have a photo on the right here with Ezra Levant, who is in charge, who is the CEO of Rebel Media, and the commander, the leader, as he calls himself. And he made a career out of denigrating Muslims, Syrians, refugees, and this as it goes on. So now the other side of the macro is governments. We have a photo here. Photo here is the Quebec legislature. Now Quebec, they created a law that said, we don't want our people wearing religious. We don't want people wearing religious garments who are in service. If you work for the state, you shouldn't be able to wear religious garments. And yet in the legislature, they have the cross there. And if you've ever been to Quebec, you know that when you're looking around, you can see there's lots of crosses and churches everywhere. But it just seemed like it was very targeted towards Muslims and Sikhs, people of color. And then there is a lot of what was happening with the Conservative Party, in 2015, 2016. Stephen Harper's government was pushing for the niqab ban, the barbaric practices hotline, Bill C-51. And during the refugee crisis, Harper was looking to move to refuse to help Muslim refugees, and instead prioritize other refugees. Was prioritizing Christian refugees, and was prioritizing like a very small sect of Muslims, like they think they're called Ahmadiyyas, but they're such a tiny percent of the population. And this is when governments are doing stuff like this, they are normalizing discrimination, and they're justifying it, and it's making it seem like this is just how things work. Now, on a bigger scale, we have what's happening in China, where the Uyghur Muslims are being put into re-education camps, and there's lots of information coming out of there, lots of conflicting stories, but they're put in these education camps to make them less Muslim. And then there is we've had genocide before, and if we're not going to do the work that we need to do to curb genocides, to curb hate speech, then we're going to lead to genocide, right? And we have examples: the Bosnian Muslim genocide, and then more recently the Rohingya genocide. So here's a quick overlook of the Islamophobic network. We have think tanks that are like sort of all over. A lot of these are in America. Some of them are here. Or if they're not here, then some of the people who are part of it are operating out of here. Now, if you look here, you see Jihad Watch. One of the things that's really interesting about Jihad Watch is one of the members of it was Christine Douglas Williams, and she was also part of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation Board. And so it really comes to make you wonder, what is someone who is working on the Jihad Watch, which is a very Islamophobic think tank, also on the Race Relations Board? It felt very concerning to me. We have here also the Middle East Forum, and one of the members of the Middle East Forum was also he was part of the cabinet for during Trump's presidency. And even Toronto Sun, probably the most far right media, like legacy media outlet that we have, which might surprise some people, but the Toronto Sun has some key writers who write very Islamophobic articles. During the Syrian refugee crisis, there was this article about how goats were in a hotel being slaughtered. Nothing like and the information that this was gathered from was from a random review on a hotel rating site, and there was no follow-up on the story. It was just, oh, this is what happened. And so that statement had to be retracted. But these are like these sort of stories were circulating out of the Toronto Sun consistently, especially in 2017. Rebel Media, as we know, as we talked about, Daily Wire, run by Ben Shapiro. That name will come up again. Breitbart. We don't hear so much from Breitbart these days, but Breitbart is still doing their thing. Now, there are Muslims who are also Islamophobic, as odd as that might sound, but Tariq Fatah is a writer for Toronto Sun, and he uses his Muslim identity to then attack Muslims. And there's a big out like there's a lot of people speaking out about what he's doing, but he continues, and he has a very cushy career, and he's been doing this for a long time. And then Imam Taidi, we don't really hear so much from him anymore, but he claimed to be an imam, which is kind of like the version of like a priest, and he said, but he would also make wildly Islamophobic statements, almost like, and some of them were racist too. Just he was, I think he's Iranian, and so he would make comments about certain races who are also Muslim. We have pseudo academics and journalists. Sam Harris was some people might hear that name and say, oh, Sam, really? Because he is someone who did a lot of writing. Just in general about I can't remember exactly, some cognitive science. He claimed to be like a neuroscientist, but he said like really egregious things about how we should just blow up the Middle East, and but he's since stopped making comments like that. It's been a long time. But Lauren Southern and Faith Goldie were both working for the Rebel Media. They became pretty radicalized in their time. They were talking about what's called the Great Replacement. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's just something to just keep in mind. Tom Quiggin used to work for CSIS, and he's now being sued by Islam Relief Canada. I haven't followed up on if they succeeded against that lawsuit, but Tom Quiggin was spreading conspiracies that IRC was collecting money to fund Hamas over in Philistine. And then Ayan Hirsi Ali, we don't hear so much from her anymore, but if you were to go onto the Dalhousie like library search, you will find articles written by her, and they're considered peer reviewed. And I find it a little bit concerning because her view is she has her experience to speak from, but some of the things that she says are pretty false. But and we can't cover all of them because there's over 100 organizations that are devoted to disseminating propaganda about Islam and Muslims in a really negative way. And we can look at the effects of what it does. It's it makes life for Muslims hard, and it like I said before, it targets women mostly, causes depression, sadness, and withdrawal, leads to poor quality of life because people are being discriminated against. It makes sense, right? And for the Muslim women, it didn't necessarily matter if they wore hijab or not. Now, Islamophobia stems from, as we know, it stems from fear and hate. It's lashing out to deal with the fear inspired by Muslims, inspired by people that they're unfamiliar with. And it works the same way as racism and white supremacy. Now we can take a look at some of the information here, but about like where these things happen. Workplace is very high. There's stories out of CSIS about people who, like Muslims who are working there, who are doing translations, who were like basically trying to work for. They thought that they were working for the country that they were part of, but they were heavily discriminated against. So it's pretty interesting. This is actually really interesting here. Is in this survey, Muslims that were surveyed believe they felt that they were treated fairly by the police, but that they were discriminated the most at work, and that their ethnicity played a role. Right? There is an argument that is made against Muslims where they say Islam is not a race; it's a religion. But a lot of times, our religion is tied to our ethnicity because of our culture, and and we can't get away from that. And that is just really just an excuse to try to dance around so that you continue to be bigoted and racist, because it is a form of racism. Now we're going to go into a little bit of anecdotals here. One of the things that's really important to notice is the propensity for radicalization can happen. It's high and it can happen fast. This is a prime example of someone who is radicalized within a couple of weeks. Darren Osborne drove a van into a crowd while people from the mosque were leaving iftar. This is during Ramadan. So iftar is what we do when we break our fast. We have dinner, right? We'll talk a little bit more about Ramadan after, but when we break our fast, we have iftar, and then when we're done, then we go home. We might do some more prayers, but Darren waited until everyone was done, and then he drove a van into a bunch of people, and very elderly man was ended up losing his life because of that. Now, Darren was radicalized by Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson would send these mass emails, and he just was strumming up so much fear, saying that a nation within a nation forming beneath the surface of the UK. It's a nation built on hatred, on violence, and on Islam. Robinson also worked for Rebel Media for some time. Rebel Media expanded. They decided Canada is not enough. We must go everywhere. And Robinson became part of an English Defense League, which was a sleepy white supremacist group. And then he worked his way into an anti-immigration political party. I can't remember the name of it right now. I think it's called UKIP. But it was a very harrowing case, but it was just a prime example of just how fast this radicalization can happen and how dangerous this rhetoric is. Now we have Ben Shapiro. We're just kind of working our way through the whole process of radicalization here. So Ben Shapiro is an American conservative pundit who speaks very ill of Islam, Muslims, and has made racist comments about Arabs. Ben Shapiro is Jewish, but continues and he uses his being Jewish as a way to sort of shield himself. And he espouses Islamophobia. He repeats these talking points. These are the same talking points that like white nationalists and neo-Nazis use. They're coming for Western civilization, right? And as you can see, we're not making this up. There's a whole video that he did on this, and that's a direct quote. And so it's like propaganda like this is shifting politics further to the right, and it's shifting politics further to be okay with violence, which is concerning that a Jewish person is doing this, considering all the history. But there's a lot that's at play here. And we're talking about radicalization. It's the same issue that we're having, right? We're seeing different people, but we're seeing the same process. Alexandre Bissonnette, he's the Quebec mass shooter, and he was radicalized very quickly. He was in a very sad state, and he started tuning into this information, started watching it, and he became fearful that Muslims were going to enter the country and take over. And so he felt he needed to strike back. He was very, very unwell. And I remember reading his, when he was being interviewed, and he said, I thought about taking my life, and I stood in the woods and I thought about it, and I decided that it's either me or them. And so I decided them. And I have a quote here, a tweet from Ben Shapiro. It says, Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. This is not a difficult issue. Right? So Ben later retracted this statement and said it's not Arabs, it's Palestinians. But the fact still remains that this is just an example of the racism that goes on. So talking about appropriate responses from a general perspective, Islamophobia, it's a well-funded industry. There's a lot of motivations that are behind funding it. Personal growth, corporate growth, whatever that looks like. And it has now become too big to stop. And so it seems that there is very little to do to say, we're just not going to let this speech happen anymore. There's a lot of dancing, lots of dancing around words and dog whistles. Dog whistle meaning that people are saying they're basically signaling to an inclination of racism or Islamophobia or sexism, whatever that looks like. Instead of just saying it outright, they find a way to dress it up. And so this needs to be addressed at the higher levels, the macro and meso, for the maximum event to prevent blowback, because we're seeing what that looks like. We're seeing it with violence in our communities, with discrimination in our government, and with really just awful portrayals in media. And we're just hoping that governments are start to respond a little better. What we have found is that education at a really young age is the most important for this. That's how we're going to stop this, is that if we start doing that, we're going to be able to build shields against people going down slides of bigotry, and everyone is going to be affected. And everyone can be, it's not just about people who are targeted, but people who can become radicalized. On a positive note, the majority of the Ummah Muslim people believe that they have a responsibility and play a role in addressing radicalization. So as we can see here, importance of Muslim communities working with government agents, like this chart really speaks for itself. I know that there used to be, so the RCMP used to show up. They have this little squadron, and they would show up to the mosque, and they would say, all right, you need to answer our questions. Who's doing what, what's doing who. And it was very aggressive, it was very confrontational, and people thought we're in trouble, and no one really wanted to talk to them. So they realized, well, this isn't working, and they had to approach from a community-oriented perspective, because we have to look at it this way. We have a demographic who are saying, we are concerned about radicalization. We are interested in doing what we can. We want to keep our community safe. We want to keep our brothers and sisters safe. That's just how we refer to each other. And we want to keep everyone safe, really, at the end of the day. And this is how we do it. We have to address it. So, if we're on board, you should treat us as if we're collaborators, that we're here and we're ready to keep our community safe. Few more positive notes. Some Muslim organizations are taking an active role in combating discrimination versus a culture of passivity, which is really speaks to a thing that we kind of a lot of Muslims that are, especially that if you come to this country, that engage in, we're just trying to fit in. We're just trying to, a lot of people are like, I grew up with the idea that we're just minding our own business, and bad things happen, but that's part of the plan, and we just have to kind of keep our heads down and keep going. But that is proving to be an idea that doesn't work anymore, and as we've let things slide out of hand. So we have to be involved, and we have to speak out, and we have to lobby for our safety and for the safety of our community and for everyone. Social media is stepping up, and they've removed certain individuals. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Although, Twitter now has changed. This slide is a little old, unfortunately, but Twitter has changed because now Elon Musk has changed a lot of the guidelines that Twitter follows. But there are good things. Media is stepping up, reporting on issues. Movies are portraying more Muslims in positive roles, and politicians are taking steps to ensure there are less issues. And we're seeing some new programs that are coming up that are helping. So now we'll go to the next part. We're going to talk about Islam a little bit here. It's part of the Abrahamic tradition. a reformation of Judaism and Christianity, and it's considered to be, from an Islamic perspective, the final message to the people, all people, which is delivered by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is the messenger of the final word from God. Islam recognizes and is tolerant of other religions. We have an entire chapter dedicated to people who are not part of like the Abrahamic religions, but saying, you have yours and we have ours. Some words that you might hear, Allah, it means the God. El, and then El means the, La means God. It's not, some people will think that Allah is a name, but it's just how we're saying God. Islam means submission to God, and Muslim means a follower of Islam. Now, to talk about that, it's someone who, what's really important is there's a lot of talk about what it means to submit to God, because we have free will. We are one of the gifted, species on this earth that is able to make our own decisions. We are not under the control of God like animals are, which is part of that's sort of part of our deen. We believe that all animals are under the control of God. And so we have free will, right? So we make the decision to submit to God. And that is a really important part, because there's a lot of talk within the Islamophobic community, as odd as that sounds, that this is we are making everyone submit to God, but this is very voluntary. And we have there's a really important verse in the Quran about how religion is not compulsive. Something that you might hear when you're talking to a Muslim person is they'll say inshallah. Oh, the weather will pick up tomorrow, inshallah, which means God willing. And it's very normal to have these sorts of conversations. These words are very, very integrated into the everyday conversation that we have. One of the things you might hear is someone say subhanallah or mashallah, which means like by the grace of God. When you see a child, when you haven't seen like your friend's kid, and then you see them and they've grown, you say, wow, mashallah, by the grace of God, because it's beautiful. It's like it's the growth of children, and it's beautiful, right? And so whenever you see something that's really incredible and it's something natural, that it's like clearly this is the only thing that this could have come from was God, and this is by the grace of God. So we say mashallah, subhanallah. So as we mentioned before, Islam is not a monolith, and Muslims practice it differently depending on where they're from. A lot of times what ends up happening is that Muslims who are in different parts of the world will integrate the culture that they live where they are with Islam. So if you look at different architectures, the way that different mosques are built, they are all kind of built the same way, but there are very interesting cultural portrayals, right? So like the culture that they are, like the culture that they're part of in the region that they are in gets reflected. And then there are different practices. Some Muslims believe you don't listen to music. Music is considered to take you away from God. Some Muslims believe that music is integral. You can listen to music without words, or it can be something to celebrate. One of the most interesting things is that in Islam, if they're like the way that things work right now is that if you have a jurist who comes out with a reading and says, this is not something that you should do, or this is something that you should do. If two of them say something different, if you have two jurists who say opposing views, both of them are correct, right? And so it really speaks to the diversity of Islam. And it is diverse. There are 72 different sects of Islam, the most prominent being the Sunni, which sort of like translates to an Orthodox, like it doesn't really change very much, and the Shiite, who have what they consider to be a living prophet. So Sunnis believe that when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, that the prophethood died with him, where the Shiites believe that it actually lives on through his family. And so they have what they consider sort of like a living prophet. which is, and there's like arguments about what that looks like, and there's some differences, but for the most part, it's all pretty much the same in terms of beliefs. There are differences, but on the grand scheme of things, Islam is not exclusive, and it's not closed off from others. It is open for people to take from, as long as it is, you know, in the name of righteousness. That's what matters. It's not, don't take it and use it to abuse other people. And then, you know, being Muslim is part of our everyday life. It's in our, like I said before, it's in our language, part of our decision making. It's how we conduct our marriages, our funerals, even the way that we do finances. It becomes very integral into how we live our lives. And we're very community minded. It is why we do not say I am a Muslim. We say we are Muslim, or I am Muslim. You know, we're not always going to do what is in our own self-interest as individuals. Sometimes we do though, but generally the culture that I grew up in is we're mindful of the people around us, and we're not so individualized. You know, we definitely think about our families and our communities, and what they think of the things that we're doing, and that, in a way, there's pros and cons to that. Now, when you're as a social worker, if you were to go to speak to a Muslim family, there's generally a patriarch, right? So it's the man is the head of the household. This isn't unfamiliar. One of the things that I've noticed is that some Muslim women will not engage with others outside of their like familial circle or community circle without the involvement of her partner. And that's just, you know, and that all depends on like I said, it can be depending on where they're from and what their culture is like and how they grew up, and you know, if maybe they don't speak English very well and that's why they're relying on them. Maybe they are just so used to their partner making the decisions, and they take care of the other things, right? So some Muslim women cover their hair. They wear traditional and modest clothing, and this is part of their relationship with God. This is something that they choose to do. And you know, there's a lot of feminist discourse around this, where it's like, well, they're being oppressed. And it's like, but if they're making that choice, are they being oppressed? As long as they have the choice, that's what matters. Women can remove their covering in front of other women. So this is kind of an issue sometimes with police, where they will try to pull someone over and they need to get a look at their face, and instead of saying, oh well, we'll wait for like a female police officer to come, they might strong arm. There's stories about that, where they've forced Muslim women to take off their hijab, and so that they can properly identify them. Some Muslims will not shake hands with people. They'll put their right hand to their heart, they'll bow their head. It can be for a variety of reasons. Not always based on like gender. There is a lot of gender segregation within our culture and our religion. So not so much our religion, definitely our culture, but there is a little bit of that separation, but it can be for a variety of reasons. Whether maybe you're fasting and you don't want to touch people because you're trying to just keep yourself as clean as possible. So if you go to meet someone, they put their hand to their heart and then they bow, you can just do the same. I'll give you an example here. It's really interesting. Oh. There we go. I don't know what happened there. So if you see on the right, this is the Prince of Norway, and he was visiting a mosque that was targeted shortly after. And this is shortly after, and so he's greeting some Muslim women here. He's putting his hand out. You can see, if you look closely, they put their hands to their chest to sort of signify that they're acknowledging him. So there was a little bit of confusion, but they explained it to him, and he did the same. You can see here, he's got his hand to his heart. They have their hands to their heart. And so there's understanding. There was a little bit of a kerfuffle. This story, these photos were used to denigrate the Muslim women, say, look how offensive they are, look how they don't care about our culture. But you know, this is a man who's inside the mosque, and it's clear that he, once they explained it to him, he was like, oh, I'm sorry, and he adjusted himself. And that's really all it takes. This is an interesting thing, is that mental illness is not always taken seriously. I didn't know how to write this very well, to be honest. I was trying to think about it, but it is kind of scoffed at. It says, well, why don't you just get happy? This is something that a lot of us grew up hearing. And a lot of times mental illness is considered to be the possession of the jinn. The jinn are creatures that are made from fire. They have free will as well. And so they can be considered to be tricksters, depending. There's lots of different jinn who do different things. Some of them are malicious, some of them are just more mischievous, some of them are just hanging out, and we can't see them, but we can be possessed by them. And so a lot of times Muslims will think, oh, well, it's mental illness, and they might do like our version of an exorcism. And some Muslims are only culturally Muslim and may live a more Western lifestyle. So it's all really comes down to, like, we have to keep in mind there's a big paradox here of community, but also individuals. Not everyone's going to acknowledge these things. I just wanted to go back to the mental illness part, though, really quickly here. So it's one of those things where we have to deal with. If we're having someone who has schizophrenia and they're going through some kind of psychosis, we have to really be careful about how this is approached, and what we have to do what's best for the person who is suffering, and for the family if they are suffering. And we have to kind of think about those things. Every situation is different and dynamic, but it's just something to keep in mind, that if you're working in healthcare or whatnot, right, and if you're dealing with someone who's being placed there under whatever mental health act, depending on the province that you're in. Anyways, I wanted to go back to this is a really important part for social workers, by acknowledging hardship. I did talk about this in my last speech, but we don't acknowledge hardship the way that a lot of people might. We say Alhamdulillah all the time. Alhamdulillah is to be grateful for the things that we have, grateful for the gifts that Allah has bestowed upon us. Even it's one of those things that happens where even when you're having a bad day, you still are expected to say Alhamdulillah, not just for other people, but for you. And it's a tone. You say the same thing, but your tone is different. And that's sort of how we always say good. When you're walking around and you say, how are you? People say good. That's sort of the same thing for us. And people say good in different ways, and we say Alhamdulillah in different ways. So for social workers, when we're trying to acknowledge and validate people, we have to be thoughtful about saying, oh, that's not fair, or that bad things, or this is so awful, this should never have happened to you, because we believe that everything that happens is supposed to happen, that this is part of our path, that we have strayed, or that this is something that we're supposed to learn from. And so saying, oh, this isn't fair, you don't deserve this, isn't validating, because we are expected to recognize suffering as part of our existence, and it's something that we learn from. And so it's a matter of taking the negatives and turning it into something positive. That works a lot better in these instances. Now we call each other brothers and sisters. We identify ourselves as an ummah. Ummah is to mean like the whole, like the Muslim family, the Muslim community, the Muslim collective. And this isn't just like the local, like the people in your city. This is the world. This is everyone who's involved. If you're Muslim, this is you. You're part of the ummah, which is an interesting thought. No, I'll jump back to that in a little bit, but So Ramadan, we don't have a lot of holidays in our religion. At least the Sunnis don't. The Shiites have a lot more, but they're a lot of they mourn people who are really important to the Shia movement, because the Shia are considered, like, they are a minority. They're only 10% of Muslims, and so there's lots of mourning of the sacrifice that some key Muslims who were Shiite have brought to their collective. But Ramadan is celebrated by all Muslims. We are fasting from sunrise to sunset. The month, when we do it for a month, and the month changes every 11 days or so, because we follow the lunar calendar. So from sunrise to sunset, we don't eat or drink. There's no water. There's no food. We just have our spit. That's all we got. So we do that, and then we break our fast at night. That's where our iftar is. We do our prayers, we break our fast. Usually it's a time where families are getting together, and there's lots of, like, families are getting together, and it's a great time for community. It's a great time for self-reflection. It's hard, but it's so rewarding at the end of it. We are up late and we pray. And then we wake up in the morning for sahur, or we have been up all night anyways. And so for sahur, it's the meal before we start fasting again. And we have our last meal, and then we start our day. We either start our day or end our day, depending on your how you live your life. But after Eid happens, or after Ramadan happens, then we have Eid, right? And it's just a whole day where we all get together, we all do a big prayer together, we listen to our imam, and then there's lots of, like, I remember always growing up, and there was a bouncy council outside. We were getting presents and food, and then we would have big feast, and it was so much fun, and it's a great little time. If someone invites you to Eid, you should go. And if someone even invites you to iftar during Ramadan, you'll have a great time. Yeah, Ramadan is really important, and we reflect and we think about removing distractions. So sometimes people won't even listen to music. Sometimes people won't watch, like, certain shows. They'll just kind of they'll read the Quran. They'll listen to certain recitations of the Quran. They'll read other teachings and things like that. One of the things that's really challenging as a Muslim living in on this land is that we get a lot of questions, because people are astounded that we aren't drinking water, that we're not eating for so long. Oh, I could never do that. I hear it all the time. The same people who say I could never do that are also doing intermittent fasting, so they're not eating for 8 hours a day. They have to, so it's just, and people aren't aware that they're saying things like that. So if you're ever interacting with a Muslim, please don't say that. You get it all. We hear it all the time. And so I'll just leave it here on my final thoughts. We are part of a cultural collective, and I'm saying this over and over again because I think it's really important, because we don't want to just lump people up. It's a big problem. It's a really big proponent in anti-racist theory. We have to really honor the individual, even if that individual is within a very, like, rigid collective. The individual still matters, right? That's really important. That's part of our ethics and guidelines in social work. So that's something that matters. The thing that we have to remember is that Islamophobia is all over our media. So we need to be aware of our biases. We need to remember to check ourselves and make sure that we're not rushing into conclusions about the people we're dealing with based on their ethnicity, their race, their religion. And if you want to support us and be part of our ummah, speak out for us, advocate for us, that means, when you do that, that means you become part of our ummah. Because in Islam, everyone is born Muslim. everyone is a Muslim. So if you are doing things for Muslims, you are part of our ummah. That doesn't mean that you have to do all the things that we do, but it means that you are, connected to us, because we are all connected, because we are part of the oneness, right? We all come from the same place. And I just wanted to say that this has been a really great opportunity. I am glad that you're all here and you've given me the chance to listen and to ramble on and to give you some of my teachings, to share some of my stories. And I'm excited to hear some questions, and we can move on from there. It's one of my favorite photos. This is I think this is in Turkey. They opened their mosque and they let the cats inside. And so you can see here, this cat is sleeping on this man's coat while they're praying. You can see their hands there. This is how when we're asking God for help, we're asking God for prayer, we open our hands and we are saying, please, whatever it is that we're asking for. I'm worried about my mom. Please help my mom. I'm worried about my family. I'm worried about my community. I'm worried about my sports team, whatever it is. So that's how, and then when we're done, we put our hands to our face and we wash ourselves with what is given to us, whether we can see it or not, whether it's there or not. But we have faith, but we do it anyways. And I'll leave you with that, with my references. Oh.
Thank you so very much. We are very grateful. There are a few questions that have come up, so I'm going to read them. I know we're a little over, but since this is also for our YouTube channel, we're going to continue with the questions. So we have a couple of questions. I'm going to read them all and then we'll kind of work through them. And hopefully, Ax, you're also taking in some of the love that's coming in through the chat. And for those of you who are on YouTube, chat is just such a great way to join us in this conversation. So one question that came in through the chat is, how is social justice defined in Islam? That's one question. We also have a question on the topic of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community and how to clinically support Muslim queer individuals and the community. There also was a question about how to address self-stigma in clinical settings. It can be easy to address, but when clients go back to society, the trauma of stigma continues. So it is a constant environment of self-stigma. How do we support clients clinically there? In terms of how to help them go back out of the office. This is perhaps like a larger conversation. How do we help fight against intersectional hatred, which was, we had a great conversation about Islamophobia. Then there was another question about how to support frontline Muslim social workers, and then suggestions for how to enter a Muslim home, and how to engage with the community to receive feedback and suggestions for how to improve programs and services such as healthcare to meet their needs while respecting their beliefs and culture. So before Ax tries to go through all of these questions, I think we need another lunch and learn. We are also looking at broader work, both in terms of professional development as well as social justice advocacy on intersectional hatred and fighting intersectional bias. And that's some of what we're talking about. It's a much larger issue, but maybe if there's one or two of the questions, I don't know which one you want to address first, or if you'd like me to reread it.
I'll answer one about when entering a Muslim home. So at least with Arabs, we have a big thing about shoes. Take your shoes off. If you can't take your shoes off, you need to bring some nice bags and put them over your shoes if you're concerned about your safety and you got to keep your shoes on. you know, like it's just one of those things where like we don't bring our shoes in the house, or bring slippers and then run out with your slippers if you need to. Hypothetically, I'm not saying that every situation that you go into an RF home you're going to have to run out, but it's really important to take off your shoes. Hospitality is really important, is a really big thing in our culture. If someone is being like, if they're giving you like, you offer you tea, you just take it. You don't have to drink it if you don't want to, but just thank you, pretend to sip, whatever that you want to make it look like. That's just, you know, it's really good to it's just better to take it than not.
Yeah, those are great, great, easy to adopt practices, especially for those of us doing home visits. You mentioned briefly that your community is working on inclusion for the queer community. We may want a larger conversation on that, but if there's anything about how to clinically support queer Muslims.
Honestly, like getting them in touch with our association is really good, because we are going to be the ones who are, we have some readings, we have some interpretations of the Quran. You know, one of the biggest, there's a lot of issues about colonialism that has sort of seeped into Islam, which is why like homophobia is such a problem now within within the way that we look at religion now. And so that's kind of like the issue that we have, especially a lot of Muslims when they come to this land, they start practicing in a very strict legalistic kind of way. And so that is very, like, it's very troubling, because Muslims want to practice, like queer Muslims will want to practice their religion, be part of their culture, but they are being discriminated against, you know. And so it's a big concern that we're having and that we're constantly addressing. It's been something that I've been working on for the past probably for the past like 2-3 months now, and it's just gotten worse. So it is an ongoing conversation, but it's a matter of, you know, it's one of those things where you can be queer and be Muslim, because people are going to sin, and you are the way that you are. God made you that way, so there isn't really a question about it. The way that we have interpreted the verse, like the surah that we have in Islam, we haven't really, like, we sort of missed a step, and there are other interpretations of it that speak more to issues around consent and a lack of, and like why like a lack of consent is an issue. And so I would suggest that they get in touch with our association out of Toronto. It's a lot better. Like if this is like from a logistics perspective, and that's where it started. And El Farouk is the one who started El Taid, and he is very knowledgeable, and he's been doing this for a long time, and he's been a great advocate. So I can get you in touch too if you want to reach out after.
Yeah, we are definitely going to continue doing more questions and conversation around this. One of the things that touches upon this, we heard in our webinar yesterday as well, where Vincent was talking about the intersectional hatred that means that Black, French-speaking queer folk sometimes experience discrimination or prejudice from their communities, and larger. That's the point of intersectional hatred, that we have intersectional identities.
Yeah.
Fighting one is not enough. We have to fight intersectional hatred in the collective, because most of us are multidimensional.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot more education that needs to happen on this. The last question is in terms of El Tawid, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is there anything east of Toronto? Is there
there might be a chapter east of Toronto. I know that there's ours. I don't know very many. I think there's a few. There's not very many. It's really because it's very self-starting, and you really have to, you know, so have to have a good group of committed people to take on the task, because it's a lot to take on.
Well, I am excited to continue this conversation with
Mhm.
you and with our members
Mhm.
and everyone that's watching this on YouTube, because we are fighting intersectional hatred that is mobilizing. And it's so important for us to think about what this means from a macro level as well as a micro level and in the ways in which we encounter. So thank you everyone for joining us. Ax, thank you so very much for sharing of your wisdom and knowledge with us. And for those of you who are interested, Ax is going to be sharing on a very different topic, vicarious burnout and trauma and compassion fatigue, and a tool that we are working on to try to support social workers there as well. So have a wonderful day. Salam alaikum, and abiding gratitude, Ax, for your wisdom.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much.